Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper here with MidwayUSA, and I'm going to tell you about why I stockpile 3 NATO cartridges in particular. Now, NATO, of course, is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the NATO cartridges are the small arms munitions that over 30 countries have agreed to produce as well as procure for military use. And because of that, it's created a very large logistics supply chain, which you can rely on and fall back on when it comes to overall supply, affordability, availability, and performance, because we also get to rely on military testing. So the first NATO cartridge that I recommend stockpiling is of course going to be 5.56 by 45 millimeter NATO. Now, there is some history there, and of course, this Wilson Combat Ranger AR-15 is representative of a 5.56 platform rifle. So, first and foremost, the 223 Remington was introduced in 1957, and not far after that, the US decided to use a similar cartridge known as the M193 and designated it the 5.56. Now, in 1970, NATO agreed to select an intermediate cartridge to standardize on, and they chose the 5.56 by 45 millimeter. However, they did not want to use M193. Strangely enough, they thought it was inhumane because of what it could do out of a 20-inch barrel, which is what the M16 was at the time of its use in Vietnam. So we standardized on the 62 grain SS-109, and it was adopted as the NATO standard in October of 1980. And that was STANAG 4172. Now, STANAG stands for Standardization Agreement, and each one of these cartridges that we're going to discuss have a standardization agreement that you can actually look up and read for yourself when it comes to parameters and performance requirements. Now, even though M193 was considered inhumane by other members of NATO, not by the US obviously, they still had requirements for the SS-109, which is basically M855, and it's what we think of today when it comes to steel core 62 grain 5.56 NATO. SS-109 had to be able to penetrate a steel helmet at 600 yards. So that just goes to show you what it's capable of doing and what its expected performance level was. And with all that testing and all that standardization, we get to benefit from understanding exactly what the cartridge is capable of. So very good to stockpile 5.56 NATO, and at the same time, it's very affordable. In fact, it's one of the most affordable rifle cartridges. When it comes to centerfire rifle, you can't really beat 5.56. It's generally hovering around 50 to 60 cents per round right now. And of course, back in the day, it was much cheaper. So 5.56 NATO, excellent choice. There's tons of it everywhere. It's used by the military currently and used by police all over the United States. And of course, it's one of the most abundant rifle ammunition types there is. So the second NATO cartridge that I suggest stockpiling, that I actually do stockpile, is 9x19 millimeter NATO, also known as 9x19 millimeter Parabellum or 9mm Luger. Yes, there are many names for it, but they're all the same. But don't get it confused with other 9mm variants that are out there that aren't actually the same cartridge. So keep that in mind when you're shopping, because 9mm Makarov is not 9mm NATO. Now, 9mm Luger, we'll just call it for the sake of this conversation, was designed in 1901 by an Austrian engineer named Georg Luger. It was adopted by NATO in 1955. So 9mm has been around for a very long time, even longer than 5.56 NATO, where its parent cartridge was developed in 1957. 9mm Luger was developed in 1901. So it just goes to show you that it's been doing a lot of work for a very long time. Now, STANAG 4090, which is the standardization agreement for 9mm NATO, required a 108 to 128 grain projectile. So we see that pretty commonly today, between 115 and 147 grains being the norm for 9mm, but the NATO standardized loading that we see on the shelf is 124 grains. So it fits perfectly in that standardization, and it had to be capable of wounding someone wearing a steel helmet and in 1952 style body armor. So even though things have progressed today, at least at the time, it was able to wound somebody even if they were wearing a steel helmet or that body armor designed back in the 50s. Might not be as effective today with modern ballistic armors and ballistic helmets, but we still understand that it was capable of that, at least back then. And of course, there's been a lot of advancements in 9mm, and it's the most popular pistol cartridge on the planet because of affordability, availability, and the fact that it just works. Especially in the last 20 years, there's been some huge advancements in cartridge design and projectile design where 9mm is honestly very capable of stopping a threat. So the US waited around quite a while on 9mm NATO. What do you mean? Well, 9mm NATO wasn't adopted by the US military until 1985 with the introduction of the Beretta M9. Now, this SIG M18 you see here on the table is my representative firearm in 9mm because it's currently what the US military is using as a 9mm sidearm. But at the time, the M9 was the first 9mm sidearm being used by the US military. Before that, of course, it was the 1911 in .45 ACP. So, in 1986, the Miami shootout occurred, which led the FBI on this journey to try to find something better than 9mm because they basically blamed the cartridge on their inability to stop the threat during that shootout. So it led them to 10mm, but that was a little bit too strong for some agents, so it led them back to 40 Smith & Wesson, which was a tuned down version of 10mm. But now they're back to 9mm because of those advancements that we just previously discussed. So 9mm, especially today, is a very viable self-defense cartridge. It's extremely affordable compared to any other centerfire pistol ammunition that's out there. And it's definitely NATO standardized. So that means militaries and police and everyone else is using it, which means it's got all the logistics there for you, which is why it's the right ammunition to stockpile. So the third cartridge we're going to discuss related to NATO loadings is going to be 7.62 by 51mm NATO, also known as .308 Winchester. Yeah, kinda. They're not exactly the same, but they're basically the same and generally considered to be safe to fire in any firearm chambered in either or, but in order to verify that, you would want to check with the manufacturer of your particular rifle. Now, Winchester actually introduced .308 in 1952, before 7.62 by 51 NATO was adopted by the military. But that was because the military was already experimenting with a similar cartridge, and Winchester had the bright idea to beat them to the punch. So the T65 experimental cartridge actually came first, 7.62 by 51mm, but it wasn't selected by the US military until 1954 with the introduction of the M14 rifle. So keep that in mind, .308 technically beat 7.62 by 51mm to the table, but that's only because Winchester was smart about marketing. So 7.62 by 51mm was finally adopted by NATO in 1957 under STANAG 2310, which had a lot of similar requirements to what we already talked about with 5.56 NATO and with 9mm NATO, but one of the requirements for 7.62 by 51mm NATO was that it had to be able to pierce a mild steel target at 550 yards with standard full metal jacket ball ammo and at 1,100 yards with armor-piercing ammunition. So it had some very long-range requirements when it came to penetration. Now, it's most commonly found as M80 ball, which is 147 grain full metal jacket loadings, but there are many other variants of 7.62 by 51mm as well, including M118LR, which is 175 grain projectile that's specifically designed for long-range applications. Now, keep in mind that .308 Winchester and 7.62 by 51mm NATO are basically the same thing, which means you have access to a lot of different loadings, especially regarding hunting or marksmanship or target shooting or whatever else you might be looking for. So it gives you a huge variety of different ammunition choices to choose from. And of course, the M14 was one of the shortest lived service rifles in American history. It did not last very long because it just wasn't what we needed any longer, and it was quickly replaced by the M16. However, M14s are still in service to this day, and 7.62 by 51mm NATO is most definitely still in service. It's used in all types of different applications, whether or not it is machine gun use, or if it's for a sniper role, or whatever else it might be used for, it will be around for quite a long time, and it has been around for a very long time. Interestingly enough, this Sig Sauer MCX spear you see right here is also chambered in 7.62 NATO, and it's also the weapon that won the NGSW contract for the US military and is now labeled the M7. So even though the military will use this rifle with a 6.8 by 51 millimeter cartridge, it can still be converted to 7.62 NATO, and that just goes to show you that it will still be around for quite some time, even with the newest generation of weapons. So that means it has everything else the other two aforementioned cartridges have. A robust logistics supply chain, which means it's affordable, it's available, and there's always going to be someone using it somewhere, especially in North America, where 308 Winchester can basically hunt anything in this country. So those are the 3 NATO cartridges that I stockpile, specifically because of the robust supply chains and the fact that they have a good level of performance. Not to mention, I think the number one reason why those 3 cartridges in particular are a good idea is because they cover all of your bases. And what I mean by that is that you have 5.56 NATO for self-defense, for dealing with pests and varmints, and you also have the ability to use it in a capacity to, let's just say, defend more than just your home. You also then can move forward to 9mm NATO, which gives you the ability to conceal carry, still defend yourself quite well in the sense of being a pistol caliber, and then being able to acquire a lot of it if you need to based on circumstance. Move over to 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO, and you also have the ability to reach out much further and take down larger game and also penetrate larger barriers and harden cover. So it covers a lot of bases when it comes to the applications you might need these different cartridges for. With those 3, you can pretty much do just about anything that you would need to do with a firearm, besides maybe sprinkling in some 22 long rifle or 12 gauge shotgun. But that's my reasoning. That's a little bit of history on each cartridge to give you some ideas as to what they're capable of, as well as how long they've been around for, which is why they're in such high supply. And it's also just a way for you to focus on what it is you're trying to accomplish when it comes to storing up some extra ammo for a possible scenario where it's no longer available. So let me know down in the comments what you think about those 3 choices. Let me know about any other ammunition types that you actually like to stockpile. There are other NATO ammunition types for small arms as well that I just don't personally focus on, such as 5.7 by 28 millimeter, or how about 50 BMG? Either of those could be applicable for certain purposes, but they're just not ones that I personally focus on. So I hope you got some information out of this video. Hopefully it gave you something to think about when it came to stocking up on more ammo. And make sure you let Midway USA know that these videos are informative for you so I can keep making them. Thanks again.